And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Before we get into the marine forecast, look at tonight's weather. Low pressure here near Kodiak Island, producing some areas of moisture around that. Mostly snow in Bristol Bay with some mixed precipitation up into the southern Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound. Next system down here to the south, warm front spreading rain into the central and southern southeast coast. High pressure, light winds in the interior, and some snow and breezy conditions for the eastern Arctic coast as well as the western Arctic coast. Next system bearing down on the Aleutians out there brings gale force winds, rain and snow to the area tomorrow with better conditions to the north. This area snow showers low close enough to keep St. Lawrence Island under a threat of snow tomorrow. Interior looking pretty good. High pressure, light winds, and a fair amount of clearing. Still looking at some lingering moisture here for maybe some light snow shower activity for the Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound area. Mostly clear Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay. This system comes northward and will bring a high wind warning into the southern southeast coast. Prince Wales Island, Ketchikan, Annette, those areas, gusts 60 miles an hour. And snow advisories for Admiralty Island for 3 to 5 inches. Then on Thursday, better conditions, still some shower activity down to the south, but pretty dry to the north, drying out as this strong high pressure starts to push some cooler and gusty winds into the northern panhandle, especially Lynn Canal. Fair in the interior, this front advancing eastward with gale force winds and rain, Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay, increasing wind and precipitation here for Nunivak Island and especially the Kuskokwim Delta coast, lighter winds and showers for the Aleutians. And for the coastal water forecast here for the southeast coast on the south coast of the southeast coast. Gale warnings tomorrow, east winds 35 knots, central coast northeast 20 to 30 knots, and east to northeast winds 20 to 25 from the north coast. Gale warnings, Lynn Canal, northerly winds 35 knots, small craft advisories for north wind 25 knots for Stevens Passage, and full gales for Clarence Strait, southeast at 45 knots, seas just under 20 feet in the forecast. Then for Thursday, light winds here over the inside waters, variable 15 knots over the entire area there, with those seas subsiding to 7 feet for Clarence Strait. And out along the coast, central and south coast, northwest winds 25 knots. And up to the north here, we've got northwest wind 10 to 15 knots. Prince William Sound for Wednesday, east at 20 knots. And east to southeast winds 20 to 25 knots for the North Gulf Coast, variable at 20 for the Barren Islands. Northeast at 30 for Kamishak Bay, Cook Inlet, north winds 20 to 25 knots. And then for Thursday, Cook Inlet, not too bad, northeast breeze at 15 to 20. Still a little brisk there for Kamishak Bay, northeast at 30 knots, southeast 30 for the Barren Islands. Western North Gulf Coast looking at small craft advisories, but winds down to 15 knots for the eastern North Gulf Coast, northeast at 15 for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, northwesterlies at 20 to 25 for Wednesday, northwest 20 for Bristol Bay. Variable winds here for the Alaska Peninsula at 15 to 20 knots. Then for Thursday, gale warnings for the Alaska Peninsula, southeast winds 35 to 40 knots. Gale warnings also for Bristol Bay, east at 35 knots, and Kodiak Island, east to southeast winds at 30 knots. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, southeast winds 30 to 40 knots, and we've got east winds at 40 knots here for Adak and Atka. Out to the west, gale warnings also, east and northeast winds 35 to 40 knots. And for Thursday here for the western Aleutians, northeast winds 20 to 30 knots, and coming down to 20 knots from the east and southeast for Adak and Atka. And the eastern Aleutians looking at southeast winds at 30 to 40 knots. And for the southwest coast, southern Nunivak Island here, north at 15 tomorrow, southeast 15 for the Yukon Delta coast. St. Lawrence Island, southeast winds 20 knots, east at 15 for Norton Sound, southeast 20 for the Pribilofs, and 20 knot winds for St. Matthew Island. And moving to Thursday, big increase in the winds here out over the Bering Sea, St. Matthew Island, looking at gales from the northeast at 40, east at 40 for the Pribilofs. Gale warnings for the Kuskokwim Delta coast, east 40 knots, sea 6 feet. And for the Yukon Delta coast, Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, east winds at 20 knots. And for the Chukchi Sea tomorrow, southeast winds 20 to 30, southeast 15 for the western Arctic coast, central coast becoming south at 15 knots, then west winds of 15 to 20 for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. And then on the day on Thursday, east winds 15 knots here for much of the Arctic coast, and the Chukchi Sea looking at southeast winds at 20 to 25 knots.